I am. Can you hear me?
Fine.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well, thank you.
Please ask permission. Hi, Ivana. Hi, Christina. Hi, Bronwyn. Bronwyn Williams, John Danaher, Christine, Jayne. Okay. This can go, this can go. Interesting.
Hi, Christina. Can you hear? Can you hear me, Ivana?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I wonder if Christina's headphones aren't working then. I'll just type for her.
I need to charge my headphones, she's saying, yeah.
Can you hear us now, Christina? No? You can hear us or not hear us? Or can you talk and see? Because it worked before. I'm not sure if it's working anymore. Can you hear us now? Bronwyn, can you hear me properly? Oh, maybe she's doing something else.
Bronwyn? Oh, she here?
Can you hear I could hear and talk to both of them before, and now everybody's not being able to. Where's John gone? Oh my gosh, Ivana!
I'm still here if you can hear me.
Okay, good.
I'm just
Your camera's gone.
I just turned off my cammer for the until we
Wait,
Hanna.
Yeah.
That is so weird. Okay. I'll tell it. Can you? Oh, where's Alex?
Christina, can you hear? Yeah?
Testing.
Hello, hi Alex.
Hi.
How's it going?
That's good. It's early.
Well, yes, where are you? Where are you based?
I'm in California.
Right. I did spot you on Twitter, and I was like, well, you need to get Alex come. And then I was like, I might be a bit early for him.
Yeah, it's quite early. I feel like I ought to put on some earrings or something.
Earrings.
Excuse
You've
me?
got the in your. I could never do anything. I mean, I love jewelry. I'm obsessed with jewelry.
So Bronwyn's gone and Christina's now gone. This is why I hate panel sessions. Let's see if they can rejoin and we can hear them. I hope it works.
I can hear you fine now.
Oh, great.
Can you hear us
It
now,
just-
Bronwyn?
Yeah, I
Okay,
can hear you
perfect.
fine. It just cut out when Ivana joined for some reason. So
Yeah, I think it happened.
Weird.
So hopefully Christina can join and we can hear her again. And then it should be okay. We've still got Gree to join as well. And Christina again. I think they're slightly running a little bit over in main stage in terms of timing, but I'm just trying to see, do we start on time because it's been advertised that way, but I'll let you know what's going to happen.
It's in the top right corner of the black screen. Just hover over that square, then you'll see the share settings again.
That might be a Wi-Fi issue, actually. Okay, I'm going to go off and ring her and try and sort it out.
I hate this.
I think we can hear you now. Disappeared again.
How's everybody doing? Where is everybody?
Yes, I know.
Just all very silent, just being
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah.
Is
With-
everyone doing well today?
Hi, Gray.
Hello?
Hey.
Hi,
So
we
you
can
hear
hear
me?
you, Gray.
Ah, okay, perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
I suppose at some point we have to start.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when. Oh, in a few minutes. Great.
I'm getting a good bit of echo on the line.
Yeah, me too.
So it's
Yeah, likewise.
somebody's speaker is playing back through.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
For me, it's
Then it might be you then.
Yeah, if it's fine for you, then you're the one.
the audience can see us now.
Yeah, okay.
Picking your nose. So we've got a message. Please shut the other tabs on the main page to prevent sound issues. Does anybody have anything else on?
No, I don't have the tabs open.
Me neither.
I had everything closed.
Nothing here.
Yeah, no, we still can't see Christina.
Christina.
Right. Oh, she's pretty busy.
I think maybe to address the issue with the sound, we might want to do what people have been doing in meetings probably all summer long, which is muting microphones when you're not talking.
Yeah. I've
That's a
tried all of
suggestion.
that. Oh, the sound is gone. Come back.
I can hear, I just went on mute.
Right, I think we can start. Really excited about this panel. Welcome everybody, and it's really great to see so many joining and listening to and engaging with us. This is very much of a conversation, so we'll crack on, and I'll briefly introduce the speakers. And actually, what I will do is I'll introduce myself, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself. And like 30 seconds, I want to know what has been your first reaction when you watched the Social Dilemma. So let's just start in a co-founder of an organization called Women Leading in Artificial Intelligence, which is a global network of women advocating for responsible AI. Really delighted to be sharing this space with all of you today. There's been a lot of discussions that we've seen on social articles, fantastic contributions written on how the Social Dilemma is reaching millions of people, which is undoubtedly a good thing, that these issues are becoming mainstream, but at the same time, they're very serious on mission. So one of the things that we want to do in this panel is to discuss together how we can set the record straight, but at the same time, how we can really look at issues like is the film really addressing the core problems of our digital ecosystem, and most importantly, where are the voices, where are those who have been for decades really addressing, fighting for ethics in technology, exposing the issues underlining technological artifacts, and often risking their own jobs for that. So I'm going to start asking you to introduce yourself, and I'm going to start with Bronwyn, if that's okay. And if you could just say in 20 seconds who you are and what was your first reaction when you saw it.
Of course, I'm Bronwyn Williams. I'm a partner at a company called Flux Trends in South Africa, and I'm a futurist, economist, and trend analyst. And I have been looking at issues of digital privacy and security and self-sovereignty for quite a long time. And I suppose my first reaction on seeing the documentary was one of frustration, which is almost like these are things we've spoken about for a very long time, and they seem to have fallen on deaf ears. And it's a little bit almost insulting to find the people only willing to listen when the voice is coming from the platform itself, when they're talking about themselves, those same characters. So that's a very brief intro as to where I'm at right now.
Great. John.
I'm an academic. I work in National University of Ireland in Galway, and I specialize in the philosophy and legal aspects of emerging technologies. So I think, my reaction to the documentary was probably tainted by the fact that I read a lot of negative commentary about it before I watched it. So I only actually watched it the first time last night. And usually I find when I go through that process where I've read all the hype or critique beforehand and I watch something, I'm pleasantly surprised. But on this occasion, I probably found it less good than I expected it to be in many ways. So, I found it quite manipulative or strangely constructed in a way that was ironic given the critique that it was engaging with technology.
Great, thank you. Alex.
Hi, my name's Alex Hanna. I'm the scientist at Google on the ethical AI team. And my first blush impression of this movie is there's a lot of rich white guys telling me what's wrong with technology. And I know when a bunch of rich white guys tell me about technology that they built, they're going to have a very particular subject position and a very particular subject view. As Rowan said, this has been written about for ages, and most notably from Black and brown scholars, from women, from queer, trans, and gender non-conforming people. And these critiques themselves, coming from that subject position, have much sharper teeth and the necessary teeth than what's coming from people who said, oops, we didn't know we broke democracy, sorry.
Totally. Right. I think you're on mute.
Yes. Classic mistake. So I'm Bree, and I am co-founder of a think tank called DataEthics.eu, and I've been in this last 15 plus years, and working not only with privacy but user empowerment in general and citizen rights and these things. I mean, my first impression was, of course, like everyone else has said, that I think that it's, there's a privileged few that gets to pose a problem and also come up with a solution. And my immediate impression was that the solution was the problem is like a simplistic reality, and also or a solution that that will create a new law, create a new ethical being that is still profitable enough. While my experience is that we already have very good law, human rights, data protection laws that has go the GDPR to 1995. So I think the problem is who gets to come up with a solution. Some in the critique that we read now focused on specific to society. I think one thing was the tips that were missing. So we have a very presentation of things.
Sorry, is that me or
Europe?
Okay, great. I think the line is breaking up. Like, Christina, sorry, girl, I think the line was the issue with the. Christina, do you want to, and then we'll check with me again if.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got, I can only agree with all of the others here who've said this, but I also want to say one thing. Have any of you watched this movie with a non-tech person? I got my mum to watch it, and she phoned me afterwards and said, what it was all of this? I mean, for her, it went too fast, too slow. And for me, it raises far more many questions than it does provide any answers. But maybe, and I don't think this was their intended consequence, but maybe the debates we're having now, the purpose of that movie, with all the critique we can give to it. But of course, I've worked for the workers for many years on AI, on data governance, and just I'm more happy about that movie, but I do like the debate, and I do like that we are actually now sitting around talking about, okay, that went wrong. What could we then do? My first question is, with all of these redeemers, what are they doing with their many millions they earned whilst they weren't killing democracy? Notice one of them is still a tech entrepreneur. How much have you then learned? And then why not give the floor to all of the specialists who have been working on this for so many years?
Absolutely. That's correct. I mean, it is a good point that you're making. We are discussing this. We are talking about these issues. But as Bree was saying earlier, there is one of the things around this ecosystem is that there is a lot of, if you think, for example, especially in the EU, there is a lot of legislation. There's a lot of stuff governing on this, and it is a matter of implementation. It is a matter of enforcement. I want to ask you a question. What is the? Do you think that we should make a documentary, or Netflix should make a documentary about telling the story about what has happened and what are the people who've been not only shaping this debate, but also the people, particularly women and women of color and people of color, who've been really bringing to the public, to the public domain, all the issues around technology and the non-neutrality of tech and all this, like all the fantastic people we've been that are in the tech and tech policy industry. Alex, what do you think?
We have movies that exist, bias discusses Joy Buolamwini's work on facial recognition and it's how it fails Black women and women of color. We have The Cleaners, which discusses content moderation work and features Sarah Roberts' work. You know, we have these cultural productions which do really highlight these problems, which are much more fundamental to these industries, which have to do with data governance, which have to do with data ethics, which have to do with who has the power to actually contest and challenge these systems, and really focusing on, you know, the issues with platforms as these huge accumulations of capital. So these exist, and I think those need to be elevated for sure.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one thing that struck me about the documentary is that it focuses on quite a narrow set of problems with AI and narrow manifestations of technology. It's really kind of two critiques of it. It has to do with social media, the way in which it's affecting our individual behavior, and then the fallout for this for political debate and polarization. And there's obviously a little bit folded in there about the role of algorithms in shaping the debate and fueling outrage and so forth. But I think it's important to probably think about the problems that are posed by AI in a joined up way. And so there's a narrowness of the critique, not only in the sense of who gets represented and whose voice gets represented, but also the problems that they're targeting. So obviously the discrimination issue is left out entirely, but I think they're also leaving out the economic threat or unemployment automation threat that's posed by this technology, and also then, you know, the political uses of this technology by governments, by law enforcement agents. I don't think that's mentioned at all. Maybe mentioned indirectly at one point in the documentary. I guess there's some mention of, you know, Russian hacking of US elections, one of the things that it focuses on. And I think it's important to include those critiques because some of the problems that they're pointing to aren't caused by one thing. So, you know, the problem of political polarization is not just caused by social media. There's a line in the documentary somewhere where somebody talks about the rise of populism in, I think, Germany, Italy, and Spain, and said, well, what do those countries have in common? Well, one thing that they all have in common is they have a history of fascist authoritarian governments, and so there's a kind of historical myopia to all this that it seems to be you'd need really an entire series, a documentary series, not just a single hour-and-a-half documentary to address these problems in a joined-up way.
Sure. I think, John, I think it's correct. You know, I agree, because of course, you know, there are so many angles to that there should be. So you have, as you said correctly, you know, there's the angle of sort of the function of algorithms curating and editing what we see and the realities that we get exposure to. There's the angle of manipulation and I think that and also the angle related to labor in all this that we would probably need, as you say correctly, you know, we probably need a whole series to discuss it. But I wanted to ask you a question. I'm going to turn it to Christina on this. So a lot of the things that we know of, they've been exposed by the courage and determination of workers in the tech sector, and sometimes even with, you know, because of sort of lack of accountability in general in the industry, but also in the absence of true formal trade unionism often. And I wanted to ask you, Christina, what is your take on this? You know, what do you think how do you think a tech worker, somebody who works in the tech industry, is sort of heroes coming and being celebrated as the savior, whilst there are people like the people you work with, the people that, you know, for example, with the women Lidiani who work with Prospect a lot, the people that Prospect represent, and how do they feel that they've been trying to do the right thing for a long time?
Well, I mean, so my personal view on all of that is any form of solidarity, you know, and I don't know if you guys know that a lot of professional basketball players, hockey players, they're all union members too. So, you know, being a sort of a unionized or collective doesn't necessarily just have to be for the ordinary worker. I mean, it's for everybody. I think we need right now beacons of light. I mean, companies each year on union bashing. So when we have people there, you know, in many parts of the world at risk, and blow the whistle and speak about this is, for me, of course, you know, an act of enormous courage. I think in the current economic crisis, in the chat here, there's some people talking about the economy, but in the current economic crisis, but of sort of neoliberal mix, a lot of people either they're coding something, tool, and probably would be, but they don't dare speak up. Worrying.
Can you hear? Or is that me? No. Oh, so we're sorry about that. Agree. One of the things that has been mentioned a lot in the chat, and they're talking, there's a lot of talk about power. So there's a lot of questions coming about power, and ultimately, you know, when we talk AI, we're not just talking about technology, we are talking about power. And there's one question that is really interesting. It says, do you think that part of the fault is that economists are not focusing on social consequences, power relationships of AI, especially it not being included into the economics curriculum for students, meaning that most will never hear of it unless they look it up besides their own studies?
Well, I think in general, power is the real issue here. So, you know, AI is a socio-technical system in the sense that it's kind of power-rated powers are distributed in society. And so I mean, I think that's a really good question, but it's a question that we can not only talk about in connection with economic students, we can talk about computer scientists or engineering students. We can look at the way that AI, the influence and the structure that AI creates for power relations in all kinds of sectors. And so I think that it's a I mean, one of the things, again, now if we go back to the whole idea about the movie of who gets to ask the questions, who gets to pose the problems, then again we have this issue of power where that for years people have been trying to, you know, pose the right questions and pose the problem, and not until the moment when it becomes profitable or interesting in that context, then that question is allowed to be asked, and then the real solutions and how do we then redistribute power through technology or through social practices or through different governance models. That's the time when we start addressing that problem, and the answer becomes incredibly simplistic. It's like, again, as I said before, the suggestion from this kind of privilege theory that gets to speak in this movie is that, you know, create a new law or create a new technology. It still has to be profitable, but it's an ethical technology. So I mean, that's the problem when power is kind of embedded in the structure of how things are built and how things are presented, no?
And what's your take?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. So I think that the sort of questions the documentary raises, there's really two ways we can address the problems that are arising from social platforms. The one is through more regulation and the other is through more education. So in the education space, as we've mentioned on this panel, at least the documentary is opening up the conversations, get more people involved in what the stakes are going on in the world and what the things are we should be concerned about. I suppose for me, one of the big red warning signs that I saw in the documentary itself is that when regulation is being called for from the players that are already in that space, from the stakeholders who already have, built citadels around those technologies, from the insiders that start demanding regulation, the cynic in me starts to think, we already have good regulations, as some of the other panelists have said already. And it becomes quite dangerous when insiders are calling for more regulation that actually just at the end of the day consolidates their competitive position. I think we have to be quite careful about that. So you've kind of got these two levers, but you have to balance them, because when the people that benefit from certain forms of regulation are also the people giving the education about what sort of regulations we need, that's when power games become very, very complicated. And we can start to see from more sort of cynical and more social perspectives how these things that are seemingly put out for benign reasons as whistleblowers could also have some ulterior motives too, in terms of consolidating power and consolidating the narrative around these spaces that these individuals have very key stakes in. So I'd say that would be my comment on that space. But I think that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could just use Mark Zuckerberg's very own words. If you can move fast and break things, and then once you get big enough, then you can slow things down for everyone else instead of, consolidate that conversation on your own terms. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense there.
If I could just respond to that briefly. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think some of what Bronwyn says is correct, but I do think it's also just worth emphasizing that the regulations that are in place in different jurisdictions have been constructed in such a way, or interpreted and applied in such a way, that has allowed many of these companies and corporations to act in kind of no man's land and regulatory no man's land. And to a large extent, that is why we've seen the rise of some of these companies. This is a problem generally, I think, with law and the regulation of new phenomena, which is that we probably do have lots of old laws or old regulations in place that could manage these industries, but they're slightly vague or ambiguous, the interpretation of them as to whether they really do cover these industries, and then they get interpreted and applied in such a way, maybe as a result of lobbying of the powers that be, that absolves these companies from responsibility. And I think you see that time and time again over the past 25 years, really since the mid-90s.
Alex, interested in your view.
I mean, I agree with that. I would also say that their regulations are pretty vague. Where, I mean, in the U.S., the privacy law is pretty spotty. We recently had a recently enacted California privacy law, as well as the Illinois biometric law, but there is no national privacy law that is really has much teeth to it. So much of the game, I think that Tristan Harris, who's one of the major speakers, and the rest of them are playing, is that they are taking advantage of this landscape and to narrowly scope and move, I think, questions around privacy, around governance, to one around attention, to one around advertising, and it really shifts the focus on what the focus should be. So it's not bad for all these companies to control immense amounts of data. They just have to use it responsibly, or they have to use it in such a way that it's not going to hack your mind in their kind of terminology. And so many of their solutions are oriented towards a particular sort of market fundamentalism intent. And so, the collection of data can continue unfettered, but we should also have companies that do things like, dim your computer lights after sunset, or block your notifications. And we've seen this itself, that around the kind of things that these groups of folks want to do is that they want to generate a cottage industry around, against tech hacking or attention hacking and towards things like quote unquote humane technology. And so, it's changing the conversation in a place where there is a regulatory gap and potentially resulting in some regulation that is not going to go far enough.
We can't hear you. Ivana, we can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry, I have one question. I mean, I really find this topic that, this thing about regulation that Bronwyn mentioned and John and Alex, but I want to ask a question. I mean, to me, it's very much an issue with business model, isn't it? I mean, data extractivism is the heart of that business model, isn't it? And to an extent, if you think about the EU, we do there is regulation in place. Don't you think there's also a problem or lack of enforcement around all this? Alex or Bronwyn or Christina, you as well. Yeah. Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want, just a point on the regulation part, because I totally agree with Alex. There's regulation that does not exist that very, very soon should exist. And one of them has to do with the influences. So all of the profilings that's being sold, as Shoshana Zuboff calls it, that she says we should ban markets in human futures. And for us in the world of work, right, it's very much these influences which can mean, do you get hired, do you get fired, will you get promoted or not? And it's not just about you, it's all the other generations and people like you following you. And for me, this is an essential thing. And the GDPR in that sense in Europe is very, very vague. Influences will cover you if they can be directly related to you, which is a scapegoat for anybody who uses a bit of anonymization in the data set, right? In the CCPA in California, that's not included. In many of the data protection regulations in the world, workers are directly exempted from the privacy rights, right? And here, then we go back to the question of human rights. How do we maintain the right to be human in this world of increasing data points? So for me, yes, we need to hold our governments accountable. But when, I sit in the OECD's AI expert group, the UN's, whatever, and all the big companies are there at the same time, right? I mean, it's also a question of, okay, when will we get some politicians? I think in Europe, they did a great step with the GDPR, but now that is almost out of date in many ways. So yeah, we need regulation, but I think first and foremost, we need to build the public awareness that can then demand in numbers some more responsible regulation.
Can I say something? No, so I mean, I think that's one of the key problems that I also saw in the film is this thing that we look at where there's gaps in laws and the letter of the law, and we don't think about how did someone choose to interpret the different laws and interpret these gaps, and as Bronwyn was saying before, move fast and break things, which was also breaking, moving the law as fast and moving the borders and the limits as far as possible, and from like if we talk about ethics, if we have to say that we're doing something ethically, it's not so much about interpreting the letter of the law, it's interpreting the values that are embedded in the laws. And so in Europe, for example, I remember very clearly the key argument of the lobbyists around the negotiation process of the GDPR, which was privacy is an obstacle to innovation. And this is why some of the people who were working with provisions like data protection by default, which was supposed to be privacy by design, had a really difficult time. So it's not so much about, how is there a legal gap or how do we interpret the law, and it's the lawmakers that doesn't know how to make laws. It's about someone choosing to build a technology that is about, waking up every morning, going to the office, sitting in a chair and saying, okay, let me see, how can I get the most data out of people to gain some profit? How can I profile people? How can I predict their destinies? How can it do? And that's the thing that was the problem. And being again to say again for 15 years, I remember still walking into the room and being ridiculed by people for being a tinfoil hat or being an old-fashioned dinosaur that didn't understand innovation or understand the future of things. And now suddenly, out of nothing, people wakes up in the morning and they think, oh, there's a morality I have to apply. But ethics is not a morality or principle you apply just one day when you decide to. It's something, it's a way of being in the world. And apparently someone chose not to consider it when they were doing innovation. And I think that's a problem, because a lot of these things that has happened beforehand has made laws, legal processes, negotiations about these values that we wanted really, really difficult for the last 15 years, because someone chose to close the eyes for a global movement that was full of people from all over the world. So,
yes, thank you. I have a question from Florist that I would like you to address, and I'm going to start with John, and it's, how do you see the challenge of trying to reach the public with all the points you're making versus the quite different goals that Netflix sorry, I'm losing the question, that Netflix like services and mainstream media have? That's a fair question, isn't it? John, what do you think?
I presume this is a question about the critique that, I guess, people like me in the academic community have of technology fills probably at this stage hundreds of volumes and thousands of articles, and how can you get that across in a attractive
but it's also kind of the challenge, because you, on the one end, you reach you've got all the points that we are making and the omissions and all that, but the fact that all the points that we're making around the wider complexities, the power issues, but on the other end there is the issues of reaching out to as many people as possible, and the subscribers, advertising income, the views, the reads. How do you reconcile these two?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's not easy to reconcile the two in one sense, and this is kind of the irony at the heart of a documentary like this, is that it has a critique of the manipulative nature of social media, and yet in order to be attractive and to generate debates like this, it has to engage in kind of persuasion, maybe manipulation as well. I mean, so this is actually something that I find quite annoying about the documentary, is the way in which it has personified the technology. So people who watch it, there's this very odd kind of fake drama in the middle of it involving a family. And I guess it focuses in particular on the son and how the algorithms are manipulating what he sees and the likes that he and notifications that he gets. And it's all, three guys behind a desk that are doing it. And that's a useful way of conveying the idea, although, to go back to Christina's point earlier on, it'd be interesting to see how non-tech people or people who aren't familiar with this react to that. And so I think that's the kind of duality or hypocrisy that a lot of us face as well. So I'm, as an academic, I promote my work via a lot of social media platforms to see if people will take it up or listen to it. I'm not sure how to address the hypocrisy or dilemma at the heart of that. The only thing I will say is that you kind of live with that duality or hypocrisy all the time, and you try and use these services in a way that you think is ethical and that can promote your message. Yeah. Although I did find it ironic as well when I finished watching it that I did get the Netflix algorithm recommending further movies to me at the very end.
Yeah, same. And in fact, I was watching and then I had sort of went to bed, and then in the morning when I woke up, I watched on Twitter, and there was Virginia Dignam, where very much, and she tweeted something like, "I felt manipulated," and that's exactly it. I felt like I was sort of the same techniques, and then I felt I had that sort of feeling of this sort of dichotomy of that you've been talking about. Alex, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts on this. One is that, there are, having a particular frame on this and presenting in a particular way I think there are, I mean, I don't want to assume that general understanding of these issues is low. Actually, I think that people get these things. They get how data does rule their lives. They understand how decision-making systems are being used every day. I think they feel that people feel that something is wrong. I talked to my mother, who's just like, she knows who Mark Zuckerberg is, and she thinks he's a terrible human being. And so it's fundamentally that I think there's understanding. I think even if people don't know the internal, there's some sense that things are wrong, and it coming from a particular sort of position, being presented, especially this dramatization, where the kind of the final instantiation of kind of the failing is these two white kids being arrested, because they show up to a protest of the extreme center, which is this sort of misinformation hub that has no politics, it seems, except the politics to be outraged, really obscures how I think people who really feel this at an embodied level, especially in Black and Brown and queer communities, where being datafied is felt on a very embodied way. So I feel like that is able to be conveyed in film, in art. That said, I don't think the revolution will be streamed. I don't think it's going to be, these things that are going to be at scale at a kind of Netflix type of business model, which is a data-driven company, just like Facebook or Google or Twitter or any of the other are. So that does put boundaries around the limits of what kinds of critique can be posted in such a large domain.
Alex, it's an interesting thing what you're saying, because you say people are aware, but it's a bit, I don't know, sometimes I feel conflicted about it. I mean, certainly in the UK, for example, with what happened with the A-levels sort of scandal recently, where, the students, because of COVID, didn't go to take the exams, and there was sort of the algorithm predicted the outcome, and the outcome was biased because it was focused on, in the end, reward the kids coming from private schools. So there was probably that was the first time that even politicians got something to deal with it for in really first hand, because they got a lot of their constituents coming to say, reaching out to them and say, my son or my daughter has been failed, and I think it's probably, this has changed a little bit the perception, at least here in the UK. But Christina, do you think that there is this general understanding, or do you think it's too opaque and too unaccountable yet?
It's a great question. I mean, unfortunately, I have to say, from the workshops, the trainings that I've been doing all over the world, really, the last years, the general awareness is very, very low. They realize, of course, called a free lunch, and after Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, there was a little bit more, what is this? But when you then go in and sort of say, well, it's not just what you do on Facebook or where you go on Google Maps, it's also all the places you don't go. All the inferences they get out of you never going to the gym, and so on and so forth, right? And I think, this whole, you can hear it in the expression, oh, I've done nothing wrong, so I don't mind if they take my data. It just shows how, we really haven't got that general awareness of the potential powers of all of this data extraction. And I really, I really think, and there's been some great questions in the chat here around, well, what can we do? And I think we have to almost relive the town hall again, right? Take all of us who are engaged in this, create some discussion groups, call the public in. I did an event at the local library here where people came and who didn't really know anything. And so I think, it's stuff like that we should be obliged to do, to get outside of our bubble of online seminars and research and Twitter and so on. So Yeah, I think we have to take this offline in many ways, but commit to spreading, and discussing everything from your smartphone to your fridge to your speakers, how that is generating data and what effects that can have on others.
Bronwyn, what do you think?
I think Christina makes a very good point there, especially about those inferences about places that we haven't been in the data that we're not putting out there. And I think that what we're pointing towards, if we start looking a bit further ahead, is that the big risk is when these sort of social platforms and this data collection ecosystems become no longer opt-in and become not opt-outable. And that's when it sort of jumps from the corporate sphere into the social sphere itself. And that's where the real risk is. And that's why this is almost like a dividing line. And that's probably the big risks that we're reaching as society. And there's not that much time left to make sure that people understand exactly what the stakes are in that regard. And I think just picking up one of the few of the other things what the other panelists were saying a bit earlier is that one of the things that did disturb me about this particular documentary is how it almost completely negated human agency. In that little drama that they had running through the documentary, you saw that boy had absolutely no agency over his life. So I think that the documentary probably skews slightly too much in actually giving too much power to very cherry-picked platforms. Because the issue is not just about YouTube and Facebook and about, the 5 big tech companies in the US at all. That's not what's happening in the world. In fact, our attention is being fragmented across different apps run by different countries, by different governments that have different elements of engagement and control and power over those systems. And it's not just a case of, US-based stock platforms at all, not at all. When we start looking at what's happening now with TikTok and all the rest of it, we can see that these platforms aren't as much of a monopoly as we might think they are, but it's the connecting the dots behind the scenes, sort of interoperability behind that. And when that starts getting into the hands of people that are not just interested in data for commercial purposes, but simply turning a profit, which is one set of issues, but when that data is being used to control your access to actual services that you're required to survive or your access to participate in democratic society, that's when it becomes very, very dangerous. And that comes back to that point I was making a bit earlier about that whole thing of individual agency. We have to give people more individual agency over their decisions, and we have to encourage people to believe that these platforms do not control our lives entirely yet. They really don't. And there's a danger in telling people that the platform is an all-powerful, omnipotent system and that we have no agency over our own lives. It comes back to also what Gree was saying earlier about companies and about ethics and the difference between ethics and morality and applying the letter of the law. So if you are reliant on a legal system to judge your morality and your ethics and your choices as a human being or as a company or as a mega platform, we really are failing as society. And that's where it definitely comes back to making sure that people understand what's going on before we start trying to fix these things with the blunt instrument of the law, because that can perhaps set up a whole different can of worms. I probably said a lot there.
Agree. And then John, I'd like you to really respond to what Bronwyn was saying.
Yes, well, I totally agree with everything you just said, Bronwyn. Exactly the point about, this is not about just reading a letter of the law and then thinking, how can I find a way to comply? And then when you realize that society has moved in a different direction and the customers are demanding something else, then adapting to that. It's about, every day getting up in the morning and thinking, let's build something that is valuable for the world. And I think that's the main thing. So if we want to really change things, then we also, it's more, I'm thinking also, and going back to the movie again, posing this very simplistic point about that it's technology that is changing us and taking away our agency. It is an entire system that allows these things to develop and be innovated in this way. So
Great. Just stop there for a second, because you said it's an entire system, and I just want to go to a question here, which is if I find it again, you said, but even if we see the issues and we agree that we need to solve them, are there alternatives? It seems that in the neoliberal system, there's fairly little that we can do. What do you think?
I think there's a lot we can do, and I think there's a lot, there's an entire thing. If you want to think about how you can move on this, you can, for example, start having public institutions that are requiring technologies that are working ethically, building human in the loop, and building things that respects human values and respects privacy. You can have, as I said before, you can have university degrees that are working in, interdisciplinarily instead of just in silos. You can have the different educational initiatives that Christina was talking about. You can have a public forum, different debates, posing questions in different ways and providing different solutions.
John, what do you think? What can we do?
I mean, to pick up on Bronwyn's point about the importance of not maybe over-ascribing power to some of these platforms that they don't have, and remembering that we still have agency and some control over our destiny ourselves. I think that's important, but I think it's also maybe important that isn't misunderstood or misdirected. So like the one thing that the documentary closes on in the closing credits is all the people that they've been interviewing throughout the documentary are offering advice about, switch off notifications and only use services that you find valuable, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that exercising your agency in that way to try to minimize your own distraction and attention mismanagement is going to be effective. I think it's only really going to be through the collective exercise of agency, through social activism, through law, through regulation, that we will address these problems. And that's because maybe I'm a little bit more pessimistic than Bronwyn is, and I think that we have it in many countries and in certain services or sectors of society, we've kind of crossed that threshold to the point where these services aren't really opt-in anymore. And there's governments using various kind of algorithmic mediation platforms for access to social services, welfare. So there are certain sectors of society that are already experiencing this problem. And one of the voices that's left out of this documentary, and people have mentioned it in criticizing it, is some of the work done by Virginia Eubanks on automating inequality. And she has an interesting point at the outset where she inverts a famous quote, I think, from William Gibson, which is that the future is here already, it's just unequally distributed. And I think Gibson meant that to mean that maybe certain powerful people had access to future technology, but she points out that actually a lot of poorer, lower class communities are having these kinds of authoritarian technologies imposed upon them already. And it's really us, or at least me anyway, in the middle class, wealthy world that isn't experiencing that.
Yeah, I mean, John, I feel very, very close to what you're saying. And I also think, I've been in privacy law for a long, long time now, but I also think that there is an issue around really focusing so much on what you as an individual can do. And we do need at some point to ask ourselves how much the consent model could continue to work, because it seems that all the responsibility onto the consumer, having to make sure that we keep things out, that we use to safeguard our privacy, that we do this. In reality, it's very difficult in a business model like this. We've got like 2 minutes left, and I want to hear from Alex and Christina. Sorry, we need to close. We've got a lot of people watching. We've been granted 10 more minutes, but Alex, what do you think?
I agree with John. I think solidarity is an important thing to remember here. And I want to also say that there's kind of different ways that we're seeing pushback from this that exists on the activist level, but are also through processes of refusal, of obfuscation, of people. I think there are ways people are finding ways of banding together. And I know the movie itself focuses on social media, but I like that we're talking about bringing in Virginia Eubanks's work, which also is focusing on systems like welfare systems that are allocating social provision, and finding that to sort of borrow a phrase from Alondra Nelson, focusing on Black healthcare, just kind of this dialectic of neglect and being over surveilled or overstudied. And so and so this unequal is very much existing, and so these modes of solidarity as a means to subvert that. And I know in COVID times, we're seeing that more and more with mutual aid networks as ways that people are trying to find different ways of connecting that aren't mediated through kind of, these very data accumulative technologies.
Yeah, Christina? Oh, mute. Can you hear Christina?
Now it will. Now I can unmute myself. Anyway, no, I mean, I agree on all of this. I think, though, essentially, we have to really, really start by looking at the markets. I mean, let's face it, these companies are doing what they're doing, expanding the boundaries, innovating, and all pays. There's a drive to do this, and that it's rewarded by the market. And at the same time, we have a world that's in a burning crisis, right? We have inequalities rising. We have a digital divide that doesn't really seem to be bridged very fast, global north, global south. We have lots and lots of issues where I would love to see the market reward actually aim to fulfill the sustainable development goals, aimed and could account for human rights, respect, and so on. And I think we just need to really say, okay, we live in a capitalist society, that's fine, that's great, but we need to frame this to save our planet and save ourselves, essentially. So for me, this would be a very, very key thing. Get the Moody's, the Standard & Poor's, get the rest of them to add these rating criteria, get the market to downgrade actions, tools, technologies which do not fulfill the SDGs or are in respect of human rights.
Fabulous. So we have to close now, and so thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all your insights. Sorry, I wish we could have talked. I could have given you like a lot of more time because you're so many fantastic insights, and surely the ones of you on this panel that I didn't know personally before this, I'd be following you and reading of what you do, and following you on Twitter and as well. So one good thing out of all this, we really, there are many good things, but one good thing of being talking, and let's continue this conversation. And as somebody said during this panel, we need to get this conversation out of of this and bring it to discuss, all these issues at the kitchen table. Really, we can't discuss it too much in pubs and cafes because of COVID, but certainly we can discuss it at the kitchen table and make sure that it becomes more and more mainstream, because ultimately in a world where we are in and out of the digital is our future, and we have to own it and talk about it. So thanks everybody for listening and for the questions, and for Sarah and the team for organizing this panel. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks. Bye now.
Bye.